Welcome to video 6 of the EKG Detective. This month we will be looking at atrial flutter. The EKG Detective is dedicated to helping people make the transition from using inductive logic to deductive logic. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the difference between the two, you can go back to video 1, where I spend some time talking about the differences between the two. Throughout this entire series, we are going to use two job aids. The first job aid is the EKG Detective Interpretation Checklist. The nice thing about this checklist is it really helps illustrate the mechanics of how deduction works. And if you're interested, just reach out to me at relevanceineducation.com and let me know that you would like a copy of the checklist, and I will make sure that I email one out to you so that you can use that as we go throughout this series. The second job aid that we are going to be using throughout this entire series is the EKG Detective phone app. It is available at the Apple Store and the Google Play Store. All you need to do is keyword search EKG Detective, and it will take you to where you can download a copy of the app. It's something that's not required, but it is a little bit easier to use in the aspect that it will more directly walk you through the process of deduction than the checklist will, but you by no means need to have a copy downloaded to work through this series. So the biggest question to ask is who can benefit from using EKG Detective? And the answer to that is anybody who is struggling with an ECG interpretation. The nice thing about this process is it allows you to focus on the waveforms and the things that you can see in the ECG, and you don't have to spend as much time focusing on the criteria within an ECG. So all normal rhythms originate from the SA node or the sinoatrial node. In relation to rate, the SA node can actually increase rate, but it has a difficult time sustaining rates above 100 beats for long periods of time. Whereas atrial foci don't have those limitations. They actually have the ability to be able to beat very fast and for long sustained periods of time. They tend to be a little bit faster, and in the context of atrial flutter, the atrial rate or the P wave rate is typically going to be regular, and it's going to beat somewhere between 250 to 350 beats per minute. Atrial flutters can either come in a regular rhythm or they can actually present with an irregular rhythm. For this specific video, we are going to be looking at atrial flutters that are regular. And going to our app, when we first open up the app, it's going to ask us whether or not the rhythm is regular or irregular. And as I mentioned, for illustration's sake, we are going to be using a regular rhythm. So we will select regular for this rhythm, and then we will hit next within the app. Referring to the EKG Detective checklist, since the rhythm is regular, we're going to eliminate any of the rhythms that are irregular. We also can eliminate ectopic beats just because they are relatively uncommon in the setting of atrial flutter. But if they are there on the outside chance, they will present with abnormal P waves, like premature atrial beats as well as junctional beats will present, or they will have different looking QRS complexes like ventricular beats. But looking at our example, we don't have any of those, so we will also eliminate any ectopic beats. The second question that the app is going to ask us is what the rate is. So looking at our example, we have about 11 QRS complexes within this strip. So our rate's running about 110 beats per minute. So we will go to the app, we will select 100 to 149 beats per minute, and then we will hit next to go to the next screen. Even though we have a rate of 110 for our example, atrial flutters are not defined by their rate. They generally tend to beat somewhere between 60 to 100 beats per minute, but they can definitely be slower than 60 beats. And in this example, we're beating faster than 100 beats per minute. But we aren't going to be able to eliminate any rhythms based off of this specific criteria of the rate. So we will go to the next screen of the app. The third question the app is going to ask us is whether or not there are P waves. Looking at our example, it does look like we have a P wave that's in front of every QRS, so they are present. So we will go to our app and we will select yes, and then we will hit next to go to the next screen. Referring back to our EKG detective checklist, since there are P waves, we can eliminate any of the rhythms on the regular side that don't have P waves, and that will eliminate idioventricular, accelerated idioventricular, and ventricular tachycardia. The fourth question that the app is going to ask us is whether or not the P waves appear to be sawtooth and/or flutter waves. So I would like to take a little bit of time and talk about what we need to do to be able to determine that there are sawtooth and/or flutter waves when we're dealing with an atrial flutter. So here are two examples of rhythms. The top rhythm is an atrial flutter, and the bottom rhythm is a sinus rhythm. The way that we determine whether or not there are flutter waves within a rhythm is we want to start by measuring what appears to be a normal P to P interval or a potential P to P interval. So looking at our example here in our brackets, it looks like that both of those beats might potentially be a P wave. So we are going to take that P to P interval or that potential P to P interval and we will march it across the strip. And wherever we have a bracket, we should have an identifiable and consistent peak or landmark when we're looking at these waveforms. And if we're looking at all of these brackets where we can actually see what appears to be a P wave, they are matching up. And since they do match up, these are P waves, and we have an atrial flutter. With that said, that means that we're going to have P waves that are combined with T waves. Some of them may actually be hidden in QRS complexes, and then we have our isolated P wave that appears to be in front of the QRS complex. When we're looking at a sinus rhythm, if we were to measure the intervals between a P wave and a T wave, so looking at this, we have a P to T interval. When we march that interval across a strip, none of them are going to match up because P to T intervals never match up. But P to P intervals in the setting of an atrial flutter will actually march up. So when we look at these waveforms, what we have is separate T waves as well as separate P waves. Now that we have marched out the P to P waves and have determined that we actually do have sawtooth and/or flutter waves, we will go to the app, select yes, and then we will hit next to go to the next screen. And that last screen, or the next screen, will actually be the atrial flutter that we've been dealing with. And wrapping up with our checklist, since we do have those P waves that are sawtooth and/or flutter waves, we can get rid of everything on the regular side, which is going to be all of the rhythms, except for the atrial flutter that we've been dealing with. All right, that brings us to the end of this episode. I just want to reiterate, if you would like to get a copy of the ECG detective checklist, just reach out to me and I'll make sure that you get a copy of it. Also, if you have any questions about the EKG detective phone app, you can reach out to me at relevanceineducation.com, and I would be more than happy to try to answer any questions or get you the resources that you need. And if you haven't done so, I would really appreciate if you would subscribe and like this video, because it definitely would help out as I'm trying to get this channel up and running. And I appreciate you for sitting through this video, and just remember that it is always better to practice as a clinician rather than a technician. See you next month.